The metallic click of the hammer echoed through the dim living room louder than the thunder outside. I could see the shaking reflection of the gun in the glass cabinet behind my stepfather. His face was red from whiskey, his finger trembling against the trigger. "You'll sign the deed right now, Claire," he growled, "or I swear this gun will speak for you." I could barely breathe. My heart pounded so hard it hurt my ribs. I had imagined this moment before his rage, his control, but never the cold barrel of a gun pointed straight between my eyes. My name is Claire Monroe, and this was the night I realized the man who claimed to protect my mother was capable of killing me for a piece of paper. The air smelled of alcohol and sweat. Behind him, my mother stood frozen pale, her lips trembling as she whispered his name. "Richard, please." But her voice was small, the voice of a woman long beaten down. He didn't even turn toward her. His eyes were locked on me, and in that moment I saw no trace of family, no trace of love, just ownership. "You'll give me what I deserve," he hissed. My hands shook as I raised them slowly, pretending to surrender, but my phone in my right pocket was already recording everything. "You taught me to fear you." "Richard," I said softly, my voice breaking but steady enough to sting him. "Tonight, I'm teaching you what fear feels like." His pupils dilated. He cocked the gun back harder, finger tightening. My mother screamed. The sound tore through the air, slicing open years of silence and gaslighting. For 1 second, the world went still. I stared into his eyes, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Lightning flashed through the window, white and violent, throwing his shadow across the wall. The shadow of a man who had convinced everyone he was a hero. I knew this was the end of pretending. My whole life I had been told to stay quiet, to keep peace, to let him win for the sake of family. But in that instant, I stopped being afraid of him. I was more afraid of becoming like my mother, silent, small, erased. I took a step forward. The gun wavered. "You think you can scare me, Richard?" I whispered. "You've already lost." His hand twitched, the gun fired, the sound shattered the silence. Glass exploded around us as the bullet missed me by inches, hitting the mirror behind. I dropped to the floor as he stumbled, shocked by his own violence. My mother lunged toward him, grabbing his arm, screaming through tears. I crawled backward, reaching for my phone, still recording, still capturing the proof I'd waited months to get. Sirens began to wail somewhere in the distance, growing louder with every heartbeat. Richard turned toward me again, gun trembling in his grasp, but this time I saw panic, not power. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the storm outside, painting the walls of our home like a crime scene. He looked at me one last time, snarling. "You ruined everything." I whispered back, "No, Richard." "You did." The front door burst open. Police voices filled the room, and as he dropped the gun as the officers forced him to the ground, I realized something I never thought I'd feel again: relief. Relief that fear was finally over. But that night was only the beginning, because what led to it, the manipulation, the lies, the control, had been building for years. And I was about to tell the world exactly how I survived it. Before the night of the gun, there was a house quiet and beautiful on the outside, rotten at its core. Willow House sat at the edge of a small town in Oregon, surrounded by old maple trees that turned blood red in the fall. My mother Diane had inherited it from my grandparents, and when she remarried after my father's death, she insisted we keep living there. She said it made her feel safe, like the house itself carried his spirit. But safety ended the day Richard Hale walked into our lives. He was a retired police officer, charming in the way that makes people trust him too quickly. The first time he shook my hand, his grip was too firm, his smile too perfect. I was 23 then, just out of college, working part-time at a bookstore and taking care of my mother while she recovered from depression. Richard made her laugh again, brought her flowers, cooked her dinner. Everyone said he was a blessing. I saw the cracks early. He started small moving things in the house, correcting how my mother spoke, deciding what we watched on TV. Then he began deciding what she wore, what friends she saw, what money she spent. Within months, her laughter was gone again, replaced by a nervous silence that filled the rooms like fog. He called it love. I called it control. Whenever I tried to talk to her about it, she defended him with the same tired phrases. "He's just protective." He's under stress. You misunderstand him. It was classic gaslighting, the kind you don't recognize until you've been living inside it too long. When I finally moved out, I thought I had escaped him. I found a job as a legal assistant in Portland, started therapy, and promised myself I would never go back. But life has a cruel way of testing promises. 2 years later, my mother called, her voice trembling. She said Richard was sick, high blood pressure, anxiety, something vague. She needed help. Against my better judgment, I returned to Willow House. Nothing had changed except the shadows. The curtains were always closed. The smell of whiskey hung in the air. Richard greeted me like an intruder. "So the prodigal daughter returns," he said, smirking. "Hope you're not here to stir up drama again." I bit my tongue, pretending politeness, but the way he looked at me like a man evaluating an enemy made my skin crawl. My mother looked thinner, older. Her hands shook when she poured me coffee. "You'll stay a while, won't you, sweetheart?" she asked, eyes begging me to say yes. I said I would. That night, as I lay in my childhood bedroom, I heard them arguing downstairs. His voice was sharp, hers pleading. Then a crash, then silence. I sat there in the dark, remembering all the times as a teenager I'd hidden behind the same door listening to my father and mother fight. Only this time, my father wasn't there to protect us. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how isolated my mother had become. Her friends had stopped visiting. Her phone had no recent calls except his. Richard managed every dollar, every decision. He called it responsibility. I called it a cage. When I tried to help her, she begged me not to make things worse. "He just gets upset when he feels challenged," she whispered. "Don't provoke him, Claire. Please." I wanted to shake her to make her see what he was doing, but I knew fear better than anyone. It eats you from the inside until you start calling it love. So I played along. I smiled at him. I laughed at his jokes. I made dinner, washed dishes, kept the peace. Meanwhile, I started keeping notes, dates, comments, receipts, little details that felt too small to matter until you put them together. My therapist once told me that abusers build their power on silence. I decided I wouldn't be silent again. The first time I saw the old property deed for Willow House, it was tucked inside a safe in Richard's office. My mother's name was still on it, but he had been making her sign updates, small papers she didn't understand. I knew exactly what he was doing, slowly transferring control until the house was legally his. He didn't just want her love. He wanted her legacy. And when I confronted him about it, the mask slipped. His eyes turned cold flat. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice low. "This house is mine as much as hers. I take care of everything here. What have you ever done?" That night, my mother cried in the kitchen, clutching her teacup like a lifeline. "He just wants stability," she whispered. "He says you don't trust him." "Because I don't," I said, "and neither should you." She looked at me like a child caught between loyalty and terror. "Please." Claire let it go, but I couldn't, not after seeing the fear in her eyes. Not after realizing the man she married was building his empire on our silence. I began planning. Quietly, carefully. I gathered every paper I could find, took photos, backed them up. I knew one day I'd have to expose him. I just didn't know it would end with a gun in my face. What I did know even then was this: the house wasn't just wood and walls. It was proof of who controlled whom. And I was done letting Richard Hale own either. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon when I heard my mother crying in the study. The door was half open, and through the crack I saw her sitting at Richard's desk, papers spread across her lap, her hands shaking. "He said it's just a signature for the insurance," she whispered when she noticed me. Her eyes were red and swollen. "But it says something about transferring rights." I took the document from her trembling hands and scanned it. It wasn't insurance. It was a deed transfer, a legal shift of ownership for Willow House, with Richard listed as the sole beneficiary. My stomach twisted. He had been working toward this for months, maybe years. "Mom, you can't sign this," I said firmly. She flinched, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "He'll be furious if he knows I showed you." I could hear his footsteps upstairs, heavy and deliberate, the kind that made every room tense. "Then let him be furious," I said. "This isn't love, Mom. This is theft." That night, Richard confronted me. You've been snooping around again, haven't you? His tone was smooth, almost playful, but his eyes were sharp. I saw the papers, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. You're trying to take her house. He laughed softly, stepping closer until I could smell the whiskey on his breath. This house, Claire. Your mother can barely keep the bills paid. I'm the one keeping the lights on, fixing the roof, paying the taxes. If I want to make sure it's in my name, that's my right as her husband. It's not your right, I said. It's her inheritance and you're stealing it. He leaned down until our faces were inches apart. You think you're smarter than me, don't you? You and your fancy law job. You don't know how this world works. A woman like your mother can't survive without a man like me. His words hit me like a slap. You mean without someone controlling her, I said quietly. His jaw clenched. You'd better watch your mouth, girl. After that, the atmosphere in the house turned electric with tension. Every time I entered a room, he stopped talking. My mother avoided eye contact. I knew he was tightening his control. He started keeping the study locked, taking his phone everywhere and whispering when he made calls. But control breeds mistakes, and Richard made one. A week later, while he was asleep on the couch, his phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at the screen, a message from a real estate agent. Preliminary appraisal Willow House estimated at $1.2 million. My heart froze. He wasn't just trying to take it, he was already preparing to sell it. The man who had promised to protect my mother's future was cashing in on her past. I took a photo of the email and forwarded it to myself. That was the first real piece of evidence I had. From that moment, my mission changed. I wasn't just protecting my mother anymore. I was going to expose him. I called my boss in Portland, a defense attorney named Matthew Cohen, and told him everything. Claire, he said, you need to document every single thing. If he's coercing your mother, it's elder abuse. If he's faking signatures, it's fraud. But be careful. Guys like that don't play fair. I knew he was right. Richard wasn't just cruel, he was clever. The next morning, he woke me up with a fake smile and a plate of pancakes, acting as if nothing had happened. Family breakfast, he said, like old times. My mother sat there pale and silent, eating because she was too afraid not to. He toasted with orange juice and looked straight at me. To family and trust, he said. My stomach turned. I smiled back and whispered, to evidence. That same week, I installed a small security camera hidden in the kitchen light fixture, another in the hallway. Every night, I downloaded the footage onto a flash drive and hid it under a loose floorboard in my room. I didn't know when I'd need it, but I knew I would. The storm was coming and the house we lived in would soon become the battlefield. From that week on, Willow House stopped feeling like a home and turned into a maze designed to break my mind. Richard's control seeped into every corner. He would move my belongings when I wasn't around, books, keys, even my toothbrush, then accuse me of being forgetful. You're always so scattered, Claire, he'd say, shaking his head with mock concern. Maybe you should see someone about that. My mother started repeating his words as if she were reading from a script. He's only trying to help, honey. You've been under stress lately. That was how gaslighting worked, one lie repeated often enough to make truth feel uncertain. One night I found the kitchen clock missing, and when I asked, he smiled and said, there was never a clock there, but there had been. I had fixed it myself as a teenager. That was the night I realized he wasn't just trying to control us, he was rewriting reality. I tried to hold on to reason. I journaled everything, every cruel comment, every manipulation. He would whisper things to my mother behind closed doors, then emerge, acting like nothing had happened. She'd flinch at loud noises, apologize for things that weren't her fault. It was as if she were shrinking before my eyes. Once I found her crying over a broken vase, and she said, he said I did it, but I didn't touch it. Maybe I did. She couldn't even trust her own memory anymore. Richard started targeting me directly. When I cooked, he accidentally spilled wine on my clothes. When I worked in the study, he turned off the Wi-Fi and smirked as I scrambled to reconnect. He began leaving doors open at night, so I'd wake up to creaking noises, making me wonder if someone was inside. It was a psychological siege, and every time I tried to call him out, he smiled like a saint. You're paranoid, Claire. You've always been dramatic. One evening, I overheard him on the phone, his tone low and commanding. Once the deed is transferred, I can liquidate everything within a month. My pulse spiked. I started recording his conversations whenever I could, using the voice memo app on my phone. He caught me once, though. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping into the hall just as I hit stop. I lied fast. "Voice notes for work." He snatched the phone and scrolled through it. For a moment, I thought I was done, but he found nothing incriminating. I'd already uploaded the recordings to a hidden cloud folder. After that, his tactics changed. He began isolating me from my mother. He'd send her on errands when I was home or tell her I'd been gossiping about her. "She thinks you're weak," he whispered to her one night, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "She's here to take the house from you." It worked. My mother stopped trusting me. She started locking her door. The divide between us widened until I could barely reach her. But control thrives on routine, and I learned his. He drank every night at 9, fell asleep in the recliner by 10, and kept the study key in his robe pocket. One night, while he snored, I slipped the key out and entered his office. The drawers were neatly arranged, too neatly. I found a folder labeled Estate Transition Plan. Inside were copies of forged signatures, my mother's name, her handwriting copied perfectly. He was already preparing legal documents to sell the property. My breath caught. On top of the papers sat a single photograph me and my mother years ago, smiling in front of Willow House. Across the bottom, written in his handwriting, were the words, "One day, this will all be mine." I took pictures of everything and replaced it exactly as I'd found it. But as I turned to leave, a floorboard creaked. His reflection appeared in the dark glass of the window. "Couldn't sleep." His voice was calm. Too calm. I froze. He stepped out of the shadows wearing his robe, holding a glass of whiskey. "I told you to stay out of my office." I swallowed hard. "It's not your office, Richard." His jaw flexed, but he smiled instead of striking me. "You know I worry about you," he said softly. "You get these episodes. Maybe we should get you evaluated. For your own good." The threat was clear. If he could convince people I was unstable, everything I said about him would sound like delusion. He'd seen the fear in my mother's eyes. Now he wanted that same fear in mine. But fear and fury share the same heartbeat. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You'll never win." He chuckled low and amused. "You already think you're losing, that's why you're recording me right." My stomach dropped. He knew. For 2 days, I lived on adrenaline waiting for the explosion that never came. He didn't mention the recordings again. Instead, he became sickly sweet, making dinner complimenting me, pretending to be the loving husband and stepfather he'd never been. But that facade only meant one thing: he was planning something worse. Then one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found my bedroom door open. My mattress was torn, my drawers emptied. The floorboard where I'd hidden the flash drive was pried up. My stomach flipped. He had found it, and on the wall above my bed, written in thick black marker, were 4 words that froze my blood: "I always find you." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mother knocked on my door, tears in her eyes. "He said you've been stealing from him," she whispered. "He says you're dangerous." I tried to explain, but she was shaking too hard to hear me. "Please, Claire, don't make him angry." The worst part was knowing she believed him. The next morning, the locks were changed. My key no longer worked for the front door. Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "New security," he said. "Can't have you sneaking around anymore." I forced a smile, holding back the urge to scream. "You can lock me out, Richard," I said quietly, "but you can't silence me." He grinned. "We'll see." That was the moment I knew it had become war. Not a war of fists, but of proof patience and survival. I stopped thinking of him as a stepfather. He was an enemy wearing a family name, and enemies leave evidence. It started with small explosions, the kind that bruise you in secret. Richard slammed doors hard enough to make the walls shake through plates when dinner wasn't hot enough and left dents in the kitchen counter where his fists landed. I stopped jumping at the sound. You can only flinch so many times before your body learns to be quiet. My mother still tried to smooth things over, clinging to her fantasy that love could tame a monster. "He's under pressure," she whispered one morning as she hid a cracked coffee mug in the trash. "He says he's losing sleep over the house. I just want peace." Peace, I thought, had become her drug. She'd take any dose of silence even if it killed her. I began sleeping with my phone under my pillow camera app open, waiting. The footage I had of his verbal abuse wasn't enough for the police, no physical evidence, they'd said. So I decided to create some. That Sunday when my mother left for church, I stayed behind. Richard came downstairs already drunk, still in his undershirt. "Did you tell your lawyer friend about me?" he asked, casually, pouring whiskey into his coffee. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," he said, slamming the mug down. "I saw the number. Matthew Cohen, Portland. You think I don't know what's going on in my own house?" I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You don't own this house, Richard. Not yet." The word "yet" hit him like a challenge. His face twisted. He walked around the counter slow and deliberate until he stood inches from me. "You think you're smarter than me?" he whispered. "But you forget I was the law. I know how to bury people who lie." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist hard enough to make my fingers numb. I winced but didn't pull away. I let my phone fall from my pocket onto the tile, still recording. "Let go of me. Say you're sorry." "For what?" "For trying to ruin this family." His grip tightened. Pain shot up my arm. "Say it!" he yelled, face inches from mine. I could smell the whiskey, the sweat, the hate. I said nothing. When my mother came home an hour later, I had a bruise on my wrist and a smile on my face. I told her I'd tripped carrying groceries. She looked at me with tired eyes that said she knew I was lying but couldn't bear the truth. That night, she placed a cup of chamomile tea outside my door, her silent apology for her silence. I cried quietly as I drank it. The next few days blurred together. I called Matthew again. "You need to get out of there," he said. "It's escalating. If you can't convince your mother to leave, you have to protect yourself." I wanted to, but every instinct told me Richard would twist it if I ran. He'd call me unstable, claim I'd stolen things, maybe even file a restraining order against me. I needed one more push, something undeniable. It came 3 nights later. The storm had rolled in, early thunder cracking over the roof. Richard had been drinking since noon. When he came to my door, he didn't bother to knock. "You've been talking to the cops," he slurred. "You think I don't hear things?" He waved a printed police report in the air, one I'd filed quietly weeks ago about his threats. My stomach dropped. Someone at the station must have told him. "You're trying to destroy me," he spat. "After everything I've done for your mother." "You mean everything you've taken from her," I said before I could stop myself. He stepped forward so fast I didn't have time to back away. His hand struck across my face, open but heavy enough to spin me sideways. My ears rang. For a second, the world tilted. He grabbed my jaw, forcing me to look at him. "You ever speak to me like that again, I'll make you regret it." My mouth filled with the taste of blood. I didn't cry. I just stared at him, memorizing every inch of his rage. The camera light on my dresser was blinking red. He didn't notice. He left me there on the floor, muttering to himself as he stumbled downstairs. I waited until I heard his snores before I stood up and touched my cheek. The skin was hot and throbbing my eye, already swelling. I walked to the bathroom mirror and looked at the stranger staring back. Then I turned to the camera and whispered, "This is the last time." The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to Grace County Courthouse. The clerk looked up when I entered, rain dripping from my coat. "I'd like to file for a restraining order," I said, "against my stepfather." She gave me a sympathetic nod. "Do you have evidence I handed her the flash drive?" "Enough," I said. When I got back to Willow House, the storm hadn't stopped. My mother was sitting on the couch, hands trembling around a tissue. "He knows," she whispered. "He found out you went to the courthouse." My breath caught. "Where is he in the study? He said you'd pay for humiliating him." That was the first time I saw her scared for me. She grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "Please, Claire, just apologize. Just make it go away." But I couldn't. Not anymore. No, Mom. It ends today. I walked down the hall toward the study. The air smelled like alcohol and gun oil. He was waiting his old service weapon on the desk. When he saw me, he smiled. "You really thought you could take me down with your little recordings," he said. I didn't answer. I just pulled out my phone, hit record, and said, "Say that again." His face darkened. He picked up the gun. That was the moment fear left my body, because fear had no place left to live. In the moments after that gun left the desk, something inside me shifted. It wasn't courage, not yet, but a quiet clarity that came from realizing I had nothing left to lose. He wanted fear. I gave him calculation. "You won't shoot me, Richard," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my heart was a hammer in my chest. "You need me to sign those papers. Remember?" His grip faltered just slightly, a flicker of logic slipping through the fog of whiskey and rage. "You're right," he said, finally lowering the barrel an inch. "But you'll wish I had." I stayed still, breathing slowly, letting the moment hang. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew running would prove his story, that I was hysterical, unstable, the crazy stepdaughter who attacked him. So I smiled. "Then let's talk," I said. That small act of defiance confused him. He expected tears, not composure. He set the gun down still within reach and sat. "You've been recording me, haven't you?" he asked, eyes narrowed. "I should check your room." I shrugged. "Go ahead." His mouth twisted into a smirk. "You think I won't? I think you already did." The truth hit him, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You've got nothing that matters," he said quickly, too quickly. "A few words, a few arguments, no proof of abuse." I tilted my head. "That's not what your service record says." He froze. The mention of his past cut through him like glass. Months earlier, I'd run a background search through legal databases. He'd been discharged from the force under internal review for excessive force and misconduct. The file was sealed but referenced domestic complaints. I'd printed it and tucked it away. "How do you know about that?" he whispered. "Because I know how to find the truth," I said. "And you can't hide from it forever." His nostrils flared. "You don't understand how this works. People believe men like me. Decorated veteran retired officer, pillar of the community. And you," he laughed coldly, "you're the unstable one. The bitter daughter who wants to ruin her mother's marriage." It was the same playbook he'd always used to rewrite the story until his lies sounded like logic, but I was done playing inside his script. I had a new one. The next morning, when he left to meet his lawyer, I drove straight to Detective Laura Briggs, one of the few women in the county's Special Victims Unit. I had called her once before, but without hard evidence, she couldn't move forward. This time, I handed her a neatly labeled folder photographs of bruises, screenshots of threatening texts, audio clips of him yelling about owning us, and a copy of his sealed disciplinary record. "You built a case," she said, surprised. "I built a trap," I corrected. "Now I just need him to walk into it." We set the plan for the weekend. I would pretend to surrender to sign the deed, and she'd have a team nearby monitoring from an unmarked vehicle. She told me to keep my phone line open, volume low, hidden under the table where we'd meet. "You're playing with fire," Laura warned. "If he's violent, don't provoke him." "He's already violent," I said. "Now I'm just catching him on camera." The next 48 hours were hell. I had to act normal, smile, cook dinner, even thank him for fixing a leaky pipe. Every second was a performance. My mother didn't know the plan. I couldn't risk her warning him. She looked at me across the kitchen table, eyes glassy with worry. "Why are you being so calm, Claire?" she whispered. "Because sometimes calm is what makes monsters trip." She didn't understand then, but she would. Sunday came heavy with heat. The air smelled like rain waiting to fall. I sat in the living room while Richard poured himself another drink. "I've been thinking," I said lightly. "Maybe it's time to settle this house thing once and for all." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean sign it over?" I nodded. "If that's what you need to stop this war, then yes." His suspicion flashed and then softened into satisfaction. "Smart girl," he murmured, finally learning her place. He called my mother into the room, pretending this was a family moment. "Your daughter's finally doing the right thing," he said, handing me the papers. I glanced at my phone under the table screen, lit faintly call connected to Laura's line. The officers were listening. My pulse thudded in my ears as I uncapped the pen. "Where do you want me to sign?" He pointed to the line labeled transferor. "Right there, and no tricks." I hesitated just long enough to make him impatient. "Do it," he barked. That was the moment Laura needed. Through the phone, I heard her voice whispering to her team, confirmed aggression. "Move in!" I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper, and then everything exploded. He noticed the blinking light on my phone, realized too late it was live. "You're recording me," he roared, lunging across the table. My mother screamed. He grabbed the phone saw the open call and hurled it against the wall. "You think the cops will save you?" he bellowed. "This is my house." I backed away, heart hammering, but didn't break eye contact. "Not anymore, Richard. It's the state's crime scene now." His confusion lasted only seconds before fury took over. He reached for the drawer, the one where I knew he kept his gun. My mother shouted his name. Outside, the sound of approaching engines cut through the air. The trap had sprung. When he turned back toward me, gun in hand, his expression was wild, half terror, half pride, as if he couldn't decide whether he was the victim or the hero. "You ruined everything," he snarled. "You made me do this." And for the first time, I laughed a sharp, broken laugh that sliced the silence in half. "No, Richard," I said. "You did this all by yourself." Through the front window, I saw the glint of police lights before he did. He spun toward the sound rage, flashing into panic. For a brief second, the man who thought he controlled every detail lost control of everything. And I, the woman he'd tried to erase, stood perfectly still, watching the empire of fear he'd built crumble in real time. Rain slammed against the windows as if the storm itself wanted to witness what was coming. The red and blue flashes from the police cars outside flickered against the curtains, but Richard didn't see them yet. His focus was on me, his finger trembling near the trigger, the barrel glinting in the dim light of the chandelier. My mother was frozen beside the table, her breath ragged whispering prayers that never left her lips. The phone he'd thrown lay in pieces on the floor, its call still faintly alive somewhere on the other end. Through that broken connection, the officers outside heard every word, every threat, every tremor in my voice. "Put the gun down, Richard," I said slowly, my palms raised. My voice sounded calm, but my knees were shaking. He tilted his head, smirking. "You think they'll believe you over me? You're just a hysterical woman with a vendetta. I served this country, Claire. I earned this house." His tone cracked on the last word. "You earned nothing," I said quietly. "You stole everything you ever touched." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm, the gun pressing into my ribs. My mother screamed. "Richard, stop, please!" he shouted at her. "You don't tell me what to do in my own home." His spit hit my cheek as he roared. "I've worked my whole damn life, and I'm not letting some ungrateful brat ruin it." The gun's metal was cold against my side. I could feel its weight, hear the small mechanical creak as his hand tightened. I thought of the files I'd sent to Detective Briggs that morning, the hours of recordings uploaded safely into the cloud, and realized something freeing. Even if I died, the truth would live. That thought steadied me. "You know what your problem is, Richard," I whispered. "You think control is the same thing as love." His face twisted in confusion, a flicker of humanity trying to surface. "You think people stay because they're loyal, but they only stay because you scare them enough not to leave." He snarled and shoved me backward. My hip hit the corner of the table pane, shooting up my spine. The gun wavered. My mother tried to step between us, crying, "Richard, please, she's your family." He turned on her with such fury that even she stepped back. "She's not my family," he screamed. "She's a mistake that never learned her place." Outside, I heard the faint crunch of boots on wet gravel, police moving closer. They were waiting for my signal, but I didn't have my phone. I needed him distracted long enough for them to move in. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "You're right," I said softly. "I am a mistake, but I'm the mistake that ends you." He blinked. That half second of confusion was all I needed. I grabbed the tablecloth and yanked it toward me, sending the whiskey bottle and lamp crashing to the floor. The noise exploded through the room. He fired. The bullet tore through the air, shattering the glass door behind me. The blast threw me off my feet. My mother screamed again, dropping to the ground. "Claire," she cried. I wasn't hit, just deafened by the sound. I crawled toward the doorway as Richard stumbled after me, the gun shaking in his hand. "You think you can win," he shouted. "You can't win against me." His voice cracked with something between rage and fear. I realized then that he wasn't a monster anymore. He was a coward, cornered by his own lies. The front door burst open. "Drop the weapon," a woman's voice yelled, Detective Briggs. Her gun was trained steady, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Richard Hale, you're under arrest. Drop it now." He froze, glancing from me to the officers flooding into the room. "You set me up," he growled. I was lying on the floor, blood on my hand from the shattered glass, my chest heaving. "No, I said you set yourself up." For a moment, it felt like the whole world stopped breathing. He raised the gun, not at me, but toward Briggs. She didn't hesitate. One sharp crack of her own weapon, and he collapsed the gun, clattering out of his hand. The sound echoed through the house like thunder after lightning. My mother crawled toward him, trembling. "Richard! Oh my God!" He wasn't dead, just wounded in the shoulder, but the fight was gone. He stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, muttering, "I just wanted respect." I stood slowly, shaking glass, crunching beneath my bare feet. The police cuffed him while Briggs crouched beside me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, though the room spun around me. My mother was sobbing, holding her chest, whispering, "I didn't know, I didn't see." Briggs looked at her gently. "Ma'am, you don't have to explain. You were surviving." As they led Richard out, the rain outside eased into a steady drizzle. The lights faded, the adrenaline drained from my veins, and I sank to my knees. My mother reached for me, and for the first time in years, she held me without fear. I could feel her heartbeat racing against mine, the fragile rhythm of two women who'd just crawled out of hell. Hours later, after the medics left and the police sealed the house as evidence, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The dawn light painted the yard silver soft and unreal. Detective Briggs joined me, holding a cup of coffee. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "You saved yourself and your mother." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped pretending. He did the rest." She nodded, understanding the weight of what I meant. "We'll make sure he never hurts anyone again. His record, the recordings, it's all more than enough." I looked at the old willow tree swaying in the wind, its branches heavy with rain. For years, I thought it was dying. But now, under the pale morning sun, I realized it was still alive, scarred but standing. That night had stripped everything down to truth. No more gaslighting, no more pretending. Just silence and the steady hum of justice beginning to move. When they finally drove Richard away, my mother and I stood at the doorway of Willow House. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder and something new. Freedom. She touched my face gently, her fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I said, "but we're still here." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The days that followed felt unreal, as if I were floating through someone else's life. The house that had once been our cage was now crawling with investigators, photographers, and lawyers. Yellow tape stretched across the porch, and the scent of gunpowder lingered like a ghost. Richard Hale was taken into custody that same night, charged with assault with a deadly weapon, coercion, and attempted fraud. When they drove him away, he didn't look at me or my mother. He just stared ahead, lips tight, as if still trying to convince himself he hadn't lost. I thought the end of fear would feel peaceful, but it didn't. It felt empty. The silence inside Willow House was almost unbearable. My mother wouldn't leave her room for 2 days. I cleaned up the glass, the blood, the broken lamp, each shard cutting like a memory. Every corner of that home carried his fingerprints, his voice, his control. But the more I scrubbed, the more I realized I wasn't cleaning the house, I was reclaiming it. Detective Briggs called me 3 days later. "We've reviewed everything," she said. "Your recordings, the documents, the photos, they're solid. He's not walking away from this." There was pride in her tone, but also exhaustion. She'd seen too many women like us, too many men like him. "You should prepare for trial, though. His lawyer's going to paint you as vindictive." I laughed bitterly. "He's been painting me as crazy for years. I'm used to it." Matthew Cohen, my attorney friend, agreed to represent me and my mother pro bono. "This is bigger than property," he told me. "This is a case about coercive control. If we win, it sets precedent." I didn't care about precedent then. I just wanted closure. The trial began 6 months later in the same courthouse where I'd filed my restraining order. Richard sat at the defense table in a gray suit, his arms still stiff from the gunshot. He didn't look like a monster anymore, just an aging man, tired and bitter. But when he glanced at me across the room, I saw it again, that flicker of contempt, that belief that no woman could truly beat him. His lawyer tried to play the narrative, a hysterical stepdaughter framing a good man for money. But then Briggs took the stand. Then the audio played. "Sign the papers, or I swear this gun will speak for you." His voice filled the courtroom, booming and venomous. The jury froze. My mother cried quietly beside me. The rest of the recordings followed the threats, the slurs, the manipulations. Every word he'd used to cage us was now a key unlocking his own downfall. When I testified, I didn't cry. I spoke clearly, describing the gaslighting, the isolation, the night of the gun. I told them about the bruises, the lies, the moments my mother thought she was going insane because of the stories he fed her. I ended with this. He taught us that silence keeps peace. I'm here to prove that silence only feeds violence. The courtroom was silent when I stepped down. Even the judge looked shaken. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to me like he still expected me to apologize. I didn't. I just stared back, steady, unflinching. He was sentenced to 20 years with no parole for 10. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I wasn't prepared for that. The cameras, the flashing lights, the questions about how it feels to win. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. But when a woman in her 60s approached me afterward and whispered, "Your story is my story too," I realized something justice wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been told to keep quiet. Back home, my mother started therapy. She struggled with guilt, repeating, "I should have seen it. I should have protected you." I told her the truth. You did the best you could inside his lies. Now we protect each other. We began restoring the house together, one room at a time. We repainted the walls, replaced the broken glass, and ripped out the locks he'd installed. Each nail, each stroke of paint was an act of defiance, of healing. A month later, a letter arrived from the county prosecutor. They were creating a program to educate survivors about coercive control and using our case as a teaching model. They asked if I'd speak at the launch. I hesitated. Public speaking terrified me, but then I thought about all the women still trapped in silence. So I said yes. The day of the event, I stood on a stage in front of 200 people, advocates, lawyers, survivors. My hands shook at first, but when I began, the words flowed. I talked about fear, about how it disguises itself as love, about the small everyday cruelties that build cages around people. Gaslighting doesn't start with screams, I said. It starts with corrections. It starts with someone making you doubt your own memory until your mind isn't yours anymore. But it can end with truth, with proof, with courage. When I finished, they stood and clapped, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, safe. Not just safe from him, but safe in myself. That night when I returned home, I found my mother sitting on the porch under the willow tree. The sky was purple with twilight. She looked peaceful, older, but lighter somehow. "You were brave today," she said softly. "You made me proud." I sat beside her. "You were brave too," I said. "You survived him." She smiled faintly. "No, we both did." The wind rustled the branches above us, carrying the faint scent of rain. For years, that sound had terrified me. It meant storms, shouting broken things. Now it sounded like cleansing, like a home finally exhaling. Later before bed, I walked through the house one last time that night. The lights were warm, the windows open, the air alive. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. For the first time in my adult life, I felt ownership not of property, but of peace. When I turned off the last light, I looked at the empty hallway where Richard used to stand and said softly, "You don't live here anymore." Then I closed the door, and this time it was me locking him out. A year later, the echoes of that night had faded into something almost unrecognizable. Willow House no longer smelled of whiskey and fear. It smelled of fresh paint and blooming jasmine. The bullet holes were gone. The walls repainted a pale gold that caught the morning light. Where Richard once kept his safe there, now stood a bookshelf lined with women's memoirs and a framed photo of my mother and me laughing in the garden. We had turned a crime scene into a sanctuary. But healing, I learned, wasn't as neat as painting over damage. It was a slow, jagged climb back to self-worth. For months, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the phantom sound of a gun cocking. I'd sit upright gasping until I realized it was only the wind brushing the shutters. My therapist called it residual trauma. I called it proof that survival wasn't the same as peace. But peace did come, piece by piece, in the small moments: a cup of coffee on the porch, with my mother, the sound of rain without panic, a full night's sleep without dreams of shouting. My mother started volunteering at the local community center, helping other women find resources for emotional abuse. I joined her once quietly at first, then more often. That's where the idea was born, not from revenge, but from rebuilding. We decided to turn Willow House into something bigger than our story. It took months of paperwork and donations, but with help from Matthew from Detective Briggs and from the prosecutor's office, Willow Haven opened its doors, a transitional home for women leaving abusive relationships. The first night when the new residents arrived, my mother lit a candle in the front window and said, "No one will ever feel trapped here again." That light became our ritual. Every woman who walked through those doors saw it a symbol that home could mean safety, not silence. We had women from every background, nurses, teachers, a retired army wife, a college student who'd run away from her controlling fiancé. Some cried for days. Others just slept for the first time in weeks. I watched them heal, and in their recovery, I found my own. Every story was different, but the pattern was the same: control disguised as care. Gaslighting masked as love, and a quiet erosion of self until you barely existed. And every time I saw one of them smile again, I thought of Richard Hale and how his need to own everything had given birth to something he could never destroy: freedom. One evening, as I was locking up the front office, I found an envelope on the doorstep. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single page, a letter from the prison. Richard's handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, and precise. I hesitated, then unfolded it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," it read. "I just want you to know I think about that night. About the house. About what I became. You were right, I didn't know the difference between control and love. I see it now too late." For a long moment, I just stared at the page. Then I folded it once calmly and slid it into the fireplace. The flames curled around his words until they vanished into ash. I didn't hate him anymore, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he no longer deserved space in my life. Later that night, my mother found me outside under the willow tree, the same spot where she once hid to cry. The branches swayed gently, whispering in the evening breeze. "You burned it?" she asked. "I did." She nodded. "Good." We sat there for a while, watching the stars blink through the branches. "Do you ever miss the woman you were before him?" she asked softly. I thought about that for a long time. "No," I said finally. "I miss the woman I was supposed to be before fear taught me how small I could become. But I like who I'm becoming now." She smiled, and for the first time there were no tears behind it. Months later, Willow Haven held its first anniversary event. The house was full: former residents, volunteers, donors, community leaders. Detective Briggs was there, leaning against the kitchen doorway with her familiar half-smile. "You turned a battlefield into a refuge," she said. "Not many people can do that." I looked around at the laughter filling the rooms that had once echoed with shouting. "We didn't just survive," I said. "We repurposed the pain." As the evening wound down, I stood by the window watching candles flicker in the garden. A little girl, one of the residents' daughters, ran up to me with a drawing, two women standing under a big tree, sunlight breaking through the branches. "That's you and your mom," she said proudly. I knelt down, smiling. "It's beautiful." "What's the light?" She pointed to the sky. "That's hope. It lives in the tree." I hung her drawing in the entryway. Every morning since I pass it on my way to work, and it reminds me that survival isn't the end, it's the beginning. I still get letters sometimes from people who've read about the case. Women who write, "Your story gave me courage to leave." I always respond with the same sentence. Courage doesn't mean you weren't afraid, it means you acted anyway. As for Willow House, it's no longer haunted. The ghosts left when we stopped letting fear live here. The floors creak because they're old, not because someone's pacing. The locks click because they keep us safe, not trapped. And every night before turning off the porch light, I whisper to the air. Not to Richard, but to the version of myself who once thought she'd never escape. "You made it." Because I did. Because we did. And in that truth, I finally understood what freedom really sounded like: the quiet hum of a house that no longer needs to be afraid of its own walls. 2 years have passed since the trial, and sometimes I still wake expecting to hear the echo of boots in the hallway or the sound of a lock turning. But the fear fades quicker now. The silence inside Willow Haven hums with live children's laughter, the clink of coffee mugs, the low murmur of women rebuilding themselves one conversation at a time. The house breathes again. So do we. Every room tells a story. The study, once Richard's domain of control, is now a counseling office where women sign papers that protect them, not trap them. The kitchen, the same place where I once hid bruises under sleeves, now smells like cinnamon and bread. My mother teaches the residents to bake, saying kneading dough helps release anger. Sometimes late at night, I'll find her humming flour on her hands, eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years: peace. We don't talk about Richard much. When we do, it's not about hate. It's about what he can no longer take from us. His name appears now and then in legal updates, parole hearings, rehabilitation programs, but it no longer stirs panic. He exists behind bars, a chapter closed while our lives keep expanding. He wrote one last letter last winter, shorter than the first. Just 6 words: I hope you kept the house. I didn't burn this one. I framed it, placed it in the main hallway beside the drawing that little girl made 2 women under a willow tree, and the words, "Hope lives here." To me, his letter isn't forgiveness. It's proof. Proof that even monsters know when they've lost. We've helped 46 women and 11 children since Willow Haven opened. Each has their own scars, their own nights they can't forget. Some stay for weeks, others for months. We teach them legal literacy, self-defense, and the power of documentation, lessons I learned the hardest way. Every intake meeting begins with the same words: you are not crazy. You are not alone. Watching the relief on their faces feels like watching sunlight touch a cold window for the first time. One woman, Maria, arrived last spring with 2 boys and a broken arm. She barely spoke the first month, but one evening she stood in the same kitchen where Richard once yelled and told her story to the group. When she finished, the entire room was quiet. Then my mother clapped first, and soon the whole house was applauding. Maria cried and said, "This place made me remember my own name." That night I cried too, not out of sadness but gratitude, for every bruise that healed into something useful, for every fear that became a doorway instead of a wall. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in justice. I used to think justice meant punishment, courtrooms, handcuffs, sentences. Now I know it's quieter. Justice is my mother laughing again. It's a child sleeping soundly in the next room. It's the fact that Richard's voice no longer echoes here. On the 2nd anniversary of Willow Haven, the town mayor attended our small celebration. He stood by the rebuilt porch, the one with new rails and fresh white paint, and announced that the county would name this stretch of road Haven Lane. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, but all I could think about was how far we'd come from that night of rain and gunfire. When they handed me the plaque, I didn't speak about survival or tragedy. I said, "This house once belonged to a man who used fear to keep it silent. Now it belongs to women who use truth to make it sing." That night, after everyone left, I stood alone under the willow tree. The air smelled like rain again, but not the kind that threatened, the kind that renews. The branches swayed above me, whispering in the wind like old friends. I closed my eyes and let the sound wrap around me. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called steady and low. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think of danger when I heard it. I thought of home. My mother joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "It's almost midnight," she said softly. "You should rest." I smiled. "Maybe just a minute more." We stood there side by side as the candles in the windows flickered. She looked up at the glowing house and whispered, "Do you ever think he watches from wherever he is?" I took a deep breath. If he does, I hope he sees this, not the fear, not the damage, but what we built from it. Before going inside, I turned off the porch light and left only the candle burning in the window. Our signal that Willow Haven is still open, still fighting, still alive. Later, lying in bed, I opened my journal for the first time in months and wrote a single line. Survival was the beginning, not the ending. Then I closed it and slept without waking once. In the morning, sunlight poured through the windows, gold and warm, filling every corner of the house that used to hold shadows. The willow tree's branches glittered with dew, and for the first time since I was a child, I caught myself smiling before I even got out of bed. I walked downstairs barefoot to the sound of my mother laughing with one of the residents. For a moment, I just stood there watching. The house no longer needed guarding. It was free, and so was I. If I've learned anything, it's this: monsters win when silence becomes habit. But if you speak even once, even softly, the walls start to crack. And through those cracks, light finds its way in. That's what Willow Haven is, not a monument to pain, but to the light that followed it. And every evening when the last woman walks through our door and locks it behind her, I whisper the same 3 words I did the night everything changed. You're safe now. Because we are, because we always will be.